Okay, so welcome to our CodeMobile panel session. This session wasn't in last year's schedule at all. And we had two speakers that underran a little bit, and we ended up with some time to fill. So we pulled together a panel, and actually it was one of my favorite sessions of last year. It worked really, really well. So I thought we'd bring it back. We've got a couple of people who were in last year's panel, mixed with a couple of new people as well. And I thought we'd give it a focus this year. So we're going to look at the future of mobile, the future of mobile app development. People have been submitting questions into our bucket in reception, so I've brought all those in with me. There is some pens and paper down at the front, so if you think of a question as the session goes on, please feel free to write down a question, and we'll pass it up to our panel. And also, if there's time sort of towards the end, we might sort of open to the floor and see if we can have a bit of dynamic dialogue going on and see sort of what happens. So I've read the questions, but I've got no idea which question is which. So I'm going to pull some questions at random, and I'm going to throw it to any member of the panel, and then we'll maybe get a couple of you to answer and see if we can bounce it amongst you. So we're going to go with first question. Okay, so which approach is better, paid app or ad supported app? And I'm going to start with Carrie.
Is this on? So can you read the question again? Paid app
Which approach is better,
ad-supported?
paid app or ad-supported app?
I mean, no one likes ads, I think, is the thing. They make loads of money. I prefer like the paid approach. I mean, it seems like a nicer subscription model. You can also, at that point, sort of, the users know that they're paying for something. They have a little bit of buy-in. You know, if they're interested in your app, they're a little bit more engaged. I mean, having said that, ads make loads of money. They're not a great experience, so I would probably go the paid model.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Pass it along. We'll go to Zan.
Yeah, I think it depends, as usual with everything in life. I do like the apps who give the users the option to kind of upgrade to the premium ad-free experience, which is what I usually opt for. And I mean, you also got to know that not everything is just a one-time purchase. You also got subscriptions, which is kind of a completely different business model as well, which is sure you got stuff that's ad supported, but also for the developers, it's better to just have the recurring stream of revenue as opposed to something that's kind of unknown, like you never know how much you're going to get the next month or whenever. So it really depends also on the markets, on geography. Like some people would prefer paid, some people don't, so it's kind of difficult.
Okay, I'm going to mix it up slightly because I think that we've got a situation where there's millions of apps in the App Store, and I think that I would imagine quite a small group of companies make a lot of money from paid apps. You know, if you've got a huge marketing budget, you will make money from paid apps. If you're an indie developer and you release a paid app into the App Store, I guess the potential to make as much money isn't always there, or is it? Maybe you've got a view, Dario.
Yeah, I have a fairly strong opinion on that. I prefer myself, personal opinion, I prefer paid apps.
Yeah.
Because, again, I'm going to be that privacy guy with advertisement libraries. You don't really know what user data you're selling off to. So if you just upfront say to the user, look, I'm using an advertisement library and it collects this and this data from you, do you accept it or not? If you don't accept it, you cannot use the app. I'm all in for that, but I'm a user that usually tries the trial, and then when I'm fairly like I like the app, then I just buy it. So I'm not really a person that uses applications with advertisement in it for that reason.
Okay. Do you maybe to bring James in at the end? Do you think there's a problem with app discoverability at all? There's actually another question somewhere in here on this, but I think that ties into this whole argument.
Yeah, app discoverability. I'm not really an app developer, so I'm more of a consumer of apps. But yeah, I definitely think the curation is a big issue. So yeah, I think there's a huge amount of apps out there, and as a user, more than a developer is, can be very difficult for them sometimes to find that. And often you just end up using your friend's recommendations and that kind of stuff, which kind of says that maybe the discoverability in the app stores is not very good if you end up falling back to friend recommendations. So, yeah, I think it's a challenge, and like some of the previous panelists have said, I definitely prefer paying for apps and feeling a lot more invested in, like, I always have this thing, if you use a free app, is it going to be there in 6 months, right? They're just going to turn it off. And I think if you're paying for it, it seems a bit more, has like a long-term strategy for funding rather than having to sell your data and that kind of stuff.
Okay. To bring you in, Xavier, so I mean, just looking at that sort of whole argument about the future-proofing of apps and things which are free. I mean, we all had the experience of PARS a few years ago when the other service effectively just vanished from beneath us. How, as an industry, do we combat that in the future? Because, I guess new services are appearing all the time. I know Tim, who's doing his Vapor workshop at the moment, Vapor is brand new, has only just appeared, and we're all sort of starting to investigate that as a technology. But it could be gone tomorrow. I don't think it would be. But then I would have said that PARS wouldn't be a few years ago. So what's your view on that?
Well, I don't think we can protect ourselves from services disappearing, because, I mean, if you take a look at Google, with the amount of money and resources they are actually one of the biggest owner of disappeared products. There was a couple of years ago a website called Google Graveyard, where you can find things such as Waves, I think it was called, or Google Reader for the RSS feeds and stuff like that. So yeah, I think any company, and big or small, could have a service that is not profitable anymore, and there could be any reason, any number of reasons for that. But for me, maybe most of them were just not useful anymore at that specific time, not useful enough anymore. So I just think that from a developer point of view, the only thing that we can do to prevent ourselves from suffering from services disappearing is just making some interfaces so that we build our application against something that we can control and that just bridges to a specific service. And when this service disappears, we can just rewrite the bridge without rewriting our own, all of our applications.
It's interesting you say that. I gave a talk a few weeks ago at a .NET event, and we were talking about the solid principles and sort of separation of concerns and the idea you can swap things in and swap things out. And it was a .NET talk as it happens, but the same principle applies, that if you have your data access layer, for example, you've got entity framework within that, you need to have the ability to remove entity framework and replace it with something else in order to mitigate that risk. And I guess that's exactly what you're saying there.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is useful. Okay, so let's dig back into the question bank and see what else we've got. iOS or Android, and why? So let's start. We'll start with James at the end, and we'll work our way along.
That's a good question. So I have an iPhone for work, but my personal device is an Android. So for me, there's probably a cost aspect to it. If I have to pay for it myself, and I want it to be relatively cheap. But I do like Swift, right? I really like Swift, so I'd probably have to plump for iOS. And if money wasn't an issue, I would probably be pretty interested in the iPhone for my personal device.
Okay, Carrie?
Well, I think if you like Swift, you like Kotlin. So, you could move to Android, I think, quite easily. I'm obviously Android. Probably for me, it's like the openness of Android versus Apple, and it's corporation and this kind of closed environment and sort of the secrets that goes on behind closed doors at Apple. So I think I'm definitely an Android.
For me, like last year when I joined Pusher, and because before I've had company-provided phones for probably like 5-6 years, and I never had to buy something. I was like always on Android, so I've kind of been on the Android bandwagon for a very long time. but I kind of decided to buy both an iPhone and the Pixel, and just to kind of test drive one each month. So I was like switching between the two for a month at a time. It's a horrible waste of money. Luckily, that got excused when my wife cracked her phone, and I was just like, hey, have this iPhone. Yeah, so for me, the main reason why I prefer Android is just the lock-in that I'm so locked into Google services that if I don't get the most seamless experience possible, then I'm just kind of like a fish out of the water, essentially. So that's it.
So for myself, so I really like the openness of Android. I really like, having all the Google services tied in. But the main thing that I like about Android is that, so I'm a developer and I'm a tinkerer, and I like that you can just dig in the source code. You can just dig into anything you like. You can change anything you want. I mean, you can write your own keyboard. I played a while back. I played by writing a Morse code keyboard. Just tap your messages. If you like Morse code, you can tap faster that way. I also like that you can change about anything you want at all on Android, and that you have total control over what's on your phone. So this is really what I like about Android.
Yeah, good question. I started in Android, so my first love is Android. I have both phones with me. One is obviously a company phone because I don't want to spend money buying an iPhone. But to be honest, I use my iPhone a lot because it's stable, because I'm always trying new stuff on my Android, which means like hooking stuff in memory, and I do a lot with the Android phone. I'm still amazed that it still works quite well. You can just refresh it. But it happens that my Android phone is not always equally stable. But I would guess if I really had to choose one, I would pick a high-end Android phone over an iPhone anytime.
Okay, very good. I would go for iOS. I think iPhone for me, I've been in the ecosystem for so long now, the idea of switching to Android is almost impossible. But the interesting thing about that is that the reason I chose iPhone originally is because I felt at the time that the software was better, it was a more seamless experience. And I think if you look at sort of, especially the newer versions of Android, that's all been sorted out. So it's an interesting thing to sort of think, if I was now starting again from scratch, which would I choose? And I'm genuinely not sure, actually. But I couldn't imagine switching, so I won't. This is a long question. With the recent, the more recent push for privacy and GDPR, what are your thoughts on analytics and handing over so much data to big aggregators? Do you have any feeling on the available self-host options, or potentially rolling your own rather than giving data to big corporations? So we'll go with Carrie at the end, and we'll work our way along, and we'll mix it up a little bit.
I think it's a really interesting point about the data that people record. I mean, I don't have too much of an opinion about rolling your own and hosting your own. Like data analytics, I mean, I kind of feel like the problem's being solved, and as long as there's a good contract between your company and the company that holds the data, then in theory it should be fine. I mean, it sounds like a really big job to be trying to do all of that work yourself. I mean, I think data privacy is going to be a really big topic, I think, for the next couple of years. I mean, what happens? I mean, if users then opt out of sending any data whatsoever, what is the experience even going to be for them at that point? I mean, can you tell them your experience is going to be worse because actually we can no longer give you recommendations because we can't record what you're listening to, so we can't give you any recommendations about what music you might like. So I think the data side of things is always going to be there. There are definitely good cases for storing and using data, so I think the problem's always going to be there. But then in terms of where that's stored, I guess, pick carefully. Maybe don't send things to Facebook, I don't know.
Or go either way.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's obviously especially this year, become such a big issue. And I think people outside of the tech industry now becoming aware of what people are doing with your data and the impacts of it. You know, whether it's from legislation like GDPR, whether it's from the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. So I think there's going to be consumers or users are going to be a lot more focused on, what are you doing with my data? Whereas before, it's just like, well, just give me the cat pictures and I don't care. Like, you can have all my data and sell it. So I don't know whether it's going to be realistic to be rolling your own analytics solutions, but maybe the market forces will make new analytics providers that are privacy focused, or make the existing bigger corporations be more explicit about how they're using their data, because it's going to be, I think, one of the themes of 2018 with some of the stories that are coming out around this stuff. So kind of watch this space.
Cool. Go for Dario.
First of all, I like the fact that this is now a question coming from audience on a conference, so it clearly shows that privacy is becoming a bigger concern. And I think there needs to be like the distinction when we talk about analytics. Is it analytics to improve user experience, like to track how a user uses your app, where he fails or where he doesn't click through? Or is it like analytics that uses information that users input in your app to later target them with advertisement or something? In my opinion, you shouldn't really forbid developers doing stuff, but I think it's important that the user knows what he's signing up for. So if you use analytics, just do your due diligence, look at what they actually collect. I mean, there's so much analytic libraries that track so much more than is needed to actually fulfill the purpose of why they created the library. So for example, a tracking library that also siphons away your context because it has a contact permission, it's really something you should think of. Rolling your own, there are analytics open source packages, like POIC is a very famous one, or known one. But that's also, I mean, at the end, what are you collecting? If you're collecting really sensitive user data for your analytics and you're putting it on a server you control yourself, then you have to make really sure that you can secure it correctly. And so I think if you're going to collect data, collect it with a player that really agrees to reserve that data for your instance. So not like, don't shoot me, but I think Google Analytics uses user data across different apps if you implement Google Analytics in your app. So that's also a choice you have to make as a developer if you want to be part with your users' information of that network. And I think the first thing that's important is that the user always knows what he's signing up for. So if you use analytics, just be open and transparent about it.
Is there a case that users should be able to opt out of analytics?
I think it should always be a choice, yeah. I always switch off, like, do you want to help this product with statistics and stuff? Personally, I always opt out, yeah.
Cool. Xavier?
So yeah, well, totally with Dario here. Likewise, I really like to opt out for any analytics in most of the software I use. In some rare cases, when I'm beta testing something, and I mean I'm actively beta testing and I'm engaged with the product, and I want it to improve, I might say, yeah, actually I want to send analytics because it might help improve this particular software that I care about. The view is, I mean, every one of us, we have the developer point of view and the user point of view. I mean, as a developer, as a product point of view, we always want to have information on how the product is used, just to know if we're doing the right thing. I think as Jitwu said earlier, you need to know if you're building the right thing. And this is one way to know it. But then, indeed, we need to be careful about what information we're tracking and how we store it and how we use it. And regarding using your own service or using an existing one, I've been in companies that one of them used their own solution to track analytics, but we had the strength and the resources to do that and to do that correctly. On smaller companies, because it's trickier, because you have to think about security, because you have to think about strength and growth, it's not as trivial, I think.
Okay, go on finally, Zan, by all means.
I think everything has already been said. I agree. If you're collecting stuff from the users, probably a good idea to let them know and let them opt out. As far as host yourself or buy something is concerned, most of the times I would advocate for buy and let some other person worry about this. It's just proven to be the best solution most of the times anyway. I mean, considering, like, you got to consider the contract and terms and conditions and stuff like that you're kind of signing up for. But yeah, it's usually a great idea to do so unless your needs actually are different and you're going to be collecting some stuff that's on a completely different scale or for different use cases. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, we'll stick with you, Zan, because you went last. So what are your opinions on cross-platform development versus native development, and in which direction the industry is heading? New tools such as Flutter and Instagram's wide use of React Native have put cross-platform in the spotlight. Is native therefore still best?
Depends.
Difficult question.
Native is, I do personally prefer the native experience. Like, I don't think Instagram is a well-developed app, honestly. Like, it's always crashing. It's never working as possible. So if that's the best that React Native is supposed to be, then it's quite sad at the moment. Although I also know that I think at SoundCloud they used it to kind of prototype stuff, right? So and that's kind of rapid development. It's quite interesting to have it at that kind of different stages of product development. But if you got the resources and can support like 2 development teams and then just go ahead and do it natively. I honestly haven't had the chance to play around with Flutter yet. It is an interesting idea, especially considering that they're doing Linux support as well, and when Google is building their new OS, because why have only 2? It's called Fuchsia, I think. So Flutter is going to be the UI framework supporting that. So yeah, I guess people are going to try it out, but at the moment, native is still king, in my opinion.
So at SoundCloud, Carrie, how are you using React to prototype?
We actually use React Native for we call it the Pulse app. So we've got like two apps at SoundCloud. One's the general listener app, and the other's like for creators. So it's for creators of music, like they can see the stats about their tracks and that kind of thing. And that was written in React Native. But there isn't much development happening on that. I mean, we wrote it at like one specific time, and since then there's been small updates, but it hasn't really been very big. And I think generally the opinion, at least at SoundCloud, is that we're not going to look to move to React Native. So whilst I would never jump completely on the native side of the fence, I am mostly still that side. I think React Native on a team where you're mostly web developers. I mean, at SoundCloud we've got quite a big team, a big mobile team. We've got iOS native devs and we've got Android native devs already. But I've spoken to plenty of people who work at companies where they've mostly got web devs. And if you've mostly got web devs, you might as well use the skills that they've got. And maybe something like React Native is actually perfect for a lot of companies. I've not played around with it myself very much, in the same with Flutter, really, to know for sure like if it's any good. But it does seem very promising. But I don't think that anything will happen anytime soon. Whilst there are still native mobile devs, I think people will still prefer that. I guess the difference is what a lot of companies I've spoken to have said is that it's really hard to hire mobile devs. So there is a chance that in some pockets, maybe in some cities where it seems to be mostly web devs, maybe this will be take on more of a thing. I'm not sure.
Cool. James, I guess you could be quite more objective about this because you're coming from IBM, and I guess as you say, you want an app developer. So I mean, does IBM have a view on sort of whether they want developers to be doing native development, or whether they want developers to be going down a web development route? What's the sort of thought from your point of view?
Well, we don't really have a point of view on one platform over another, really. We're, I think, building services and backends and platforms that allow you to support both. Obviously, the growth of React Native has been pretty big, and as Carrie said, to getting started, for lots of people who are maybe new to mobile development, maybe do come from a web background, it's kind of inevitable that React Native is going to be a big thing for a while. But yeah, we don't really pick one over the other. We have a partnership with Apple, and we are heavily kind of invested in Swift, but we don't have a huge position on that. So yeah, but I mean, as a developer, I think I do like React Native. I've been playing around with it, but yeah, I mean, that native experience is always going to be hard to replicate.
Yeah, no, I guess that's always going to be true. When we come to you guys at the end, have you got anything to add to the arguments?
Well, I mean, right now, we have Flutter and React Native that are getting a lot of visibility, but there was PhoneGap and CodeMobile like 5 years ago, and I mean, where are they now? And so, I mean, if you're prototyping or you're doing some very quick, short development and you want it on two different platforms at once and you only have a couple of developers, yeah, sure, you can do that. If it's for one shot, like for an event or something, you can use those tools to speed up your development. But if you're planning on doing your own application and maintain it over time, I think going native is the best way because you're going to fit better in the platform. You're going to fit better with everything the platform can give you. And yeah, I mean, whenever an app is not native, it's using a cross-platform framework, it usually shows. There's always something more or less off about it that breaks the immersion inside the application. Just to give an example, a couple of years ago, I was using Pebble. I had a Pebble watch, and I was using a Pebble app, and they completely revamped the first version of the app, and they went to, I guess, a PhoneGap or CodeMobile bridge to do the same thing on both iOS and Android. And so they did it well at first because they completely replicated in CSS the material UI, and at first, even I was tricked, even though I'm a developer. But the thing that went off is that you click on something, on a button to go to a different page, and the transition is a web transition. It's like you go from one page to another. It's not an activity transition like we used to in Android. And also, you don't get all the experience of having an activity loading. When you have an activity loading in Android, you have part of the UI that's already there. When it's a web view, you just get a blank page until enough information is loaded, and then the page is started building itself. So yeah, there's always something off with the cross-platform solution for now. So
I think you're right in saying that. Recently, I've picked up some work on a cross-platform app that's been written in Xamarin, and I understand why it's been written in Xamarin. I understand the business case for doing that. But you're right, when you open the app up, you can tell that it's not a native app. And I personally find it quite glitchy in terms of how it works and sort of, how the UI interface sort of, hangs together and gels. And I think that has been a problem with a lot of cross-platform apps sort of historically. I mean, is that something which you think will get better, Dario?
Actually, I don't know, but I had a very strong opinion when these frameworks first came up from a security point of view, because it's already difficult to write a secure web app, and let alone packaging that web app and connecting it to a Java native bridge on Android to connect with the Android runtime. So I also think there's a difference. Like you have the Xamarin framework, which is a little bit different for me than the other hybrid frameworks that create like web apps and then package it. And also React Native, I think it compiles really natively to, I'm not into it completely, but it compiles really natively into it. So nowadays, I really don't have that strong an opinion anymore, because apparently it's like a popular choice to go hybrid. But if you would ask me intuitively, I would prefer a native app, I think.
I mean, I guess there's an argument with the Xamarin app, for example, that if you have a lot of your shared code or almost kind of a framework you want to base your app upon, you're developing it once and then making it available to two native apps that use that framework is probably an option that works potentially, because, you know, rather than have to develop almost kind of two frameworks for different platforms.
I really think it depends on the complexity of your app. If you're doing some real low-level stuff, like if you have to have a native library that does some optimization on specific mathematical operations, and you have a Xamarin app, you are somehow tied to how good the runtime of Xamarin works on the Android phone, because obviously, you probably know how it works, but if you have the DLLs, they are being run inside of a virtual machine but not the Android virtual machine. So if you want to have like more low-level control, I would think that you're not in the best way with Xamarin, in my opinion.
Just to bounce off the sharing code, actually at Rockwell we tried to start sharing part at least of our code, and so we started getting some description files for specific parts of the business logic, or for some specific parts of our code that generates either in Kotlin or in Swift part of our code, so that some of it is actually shared. And that's something that could be looked into write once and read everywhere, at least part of it. But for the UI, for the integration with the framework, integration with the sensors, go native.
Okay, very good. Let's go with... This is an interesting question to people who are very Android-focused on the stage, because I think the answer may be yes, but we might ask the question a different way in a second. Have Apple run out of ideas? Let's go. We'll go from the end again. We'll go to James.
I think that, well, the future is very difficult to predict, isn't it? So I think that, I don't know. Obviously, Apple's been written off many times in its history and has always come back. And they also, you don't forget, they have like a massive, literally stockpiles of cash, right? So they're not like hemorrhaging money. They still make absolute boodles of money. So they have a fair way to kind of figure it out. So yeah, obviously, I think some of the new stuff they're doing is really interesting, and with machine learning. So yeah, I don't think they've run out of ideas. Obviously, it's hard to churn out hit after hit after hit, and they've got enough money and time to take quite a long time to figure it out. So maybe in the short term, but yeah, I wouldn't bet against them at the moment. But yeah, the future is very very hard to predict, isn't it?
Okay, I'm gonna change the question around a little bit as we go up, because I think everyone will give a similar sort of answer to that. So if you think about new features that have sort of come out on phones generally, when I was at university, I used to dream of having a phone that would reliably connect to Wi-Fi, and I could access my emails, and I could maybe have a good notes application, or maybe even write a document on a tablet or something like that. And these things just didn't exist. And over the last 10 years or so, this technology sort of it's all there now. So I guess the question that I'd maybe come to carry with is, what more do you want your mobile device to do that it doesn't do now?
Last longer, maybe.
Battery life.
I mean, I think that with all of these like new developments of things, I mean, phones got really, really small for a while, and then it was like cool for phones to get bigger again. I kind of think, in a way, maybe you're right. Like maybe there hasn't actually been like that much innovation completely to Apple, or maybe even to mobile in general. I mean, a lot has changed since in the last 10 years, say, but maybe in the last few years. I mean, Apple have just made the screen go slightly closer to the edge. It's not amazing. I mean, they made questionable decisions on the latest like Macs. You know, that seems a little bit strange. So I guess, I mean, the thing is, really, it doesn't matter, really, if Apple are innovate or not. People are still going to carry on buying the phones. People, like you said before, you are completely invested in the infrastructure. You're completely bought into Apple now, and I think most people are. So I think it doesn't really matter if they innovate, I guess. I'd like to see, just slightly better phones. I mean, you can't imagine what people are going to do in the future. I mean, there's that saying, like, if I'd have asked them what they wanted, they would have wanted a faster horse or something, like the Ford quote. So I think it's one of those things. You don't know what's going to happen with devices.
Yeah, and to come back to that a little bit, I mean, Apple have kind of got to a point where they are having huge success. They're selling lots of new phones and all of those sorts of things. Do you think Android is ahead or behind of iOS in terms of its development? I mean, they're pretty similar, I guess, in terms of features now. Does Android really do anything or that iOS doesn't? I mean, there's not a lot.
The thing is, they have to do the same as each other, otherwise it's a real draw to the other side. You know, if Android devices didn't have cameras, for example, no one would use them. Like they kind of have to have the same thing. So as soon as one introduces a feature, it's kind of at that point you have to play the other one has to play catch up. I mean, there's no way that a new phone could come out now which didn't have a camera and didn't have the ability to send emails. I mean, it just would never take off. So they have to have the same features. And I think in a way, rather than pushing for new features to be written, I think what a lot of them seem to do is they try and do it just that little bit better. So it's like, we have a voice assistant, but ours is slightly better, slightly faster. It answers slightly more accurately than the other one does. So it's kind of hard at that point for them to spend time with innovation because maybe they spend all of their time just catching up and trying to improve on the things that they've already got.
It's interesting actually hearing some of the other things you were saying about the fact that Apple they're everywhere, or smartphones generally are everywhere, and it kind of sort of makes you think about the history of BlackBerry, for example. Now, I mean, there was a point in time when everybody had a BlackBerry, and you couldn't imagine a situation where you wouldn't have a BlackBerry. So, is Google and Apple too big to fail, Dario?
Well, if you're gonna compare it to BlackBerry, I mean, they made some wrong decisions, so that's why they ended up by not existing anymore, I guess, if you can say it like that. But I think what is lacking, and I really think they're too big to fail at this point to answer it directly. But what I'm missing actually last couple of years is that these companies that are supposed to be the innovators in their field, and I'm talking about Google and Apple, they're just now improving stuff. They're not like innovating stuff. I mean, when you look at the features that I recall that were like the headlines when iPhone X came out was like Face ID, moving emojis, and like the chip out of the screen for some reason. So at that point, I was thinking like, okay, but what are they innovating in? What's something new that I didn't know that I wanted, but that they can give me? And I'm failing to understand that from Google and Apple at this point.
The one thing that I really want, if Apple's listening, I would love my iPhone to have a dual SIM card. I think the idea of being able to have a work number and a home number on my iPhone would be a brilliant thing to do. So if we'd have that at WWDC, that would be brilliant this year.
You have a lot of Android phones that do that already, huh?
I know. I've seen two today, but it needs to come to my iPhone. So if we could sort that, cheers. Thanks very much, Tim. What is the so next question? What is the next big thing, Xavier?
What's the next big thing? Oh, that's a very, very good question. I think, well, it's very hard to predict the future, of course, but I think the next big thing won't be hardware or a drastic change in the phones, probably. I'm hoping that the next big thing is going to be more hopefully a change in the way we live together, maybe. It's kind of my pageant answer, but yeah, it's right now the technology is, as we've all noticed, it's just improving slightly. I mean, it's much like 20 years ago where computers were just getting better RAM and better CPU and better larger disks. Right now, the phone is the same thing. You have a camera with slightly more pixels. You have a CPU that runs slightly faster, and the battery runs slightly less longer. But it's not innovation. It's not nothing new. And the next big thing, I think, is going to be maybe a change in the way we live, I hope.
Some of the stuff that Google are doing with their voice recognition, I think is brilliant. So if you've got Google Home and you'll walk in and say, Google, show me my calendar, it will put your calendar up on the TV, whereas if somebody else in the house did it, it will put their calendar up on the TV. I think that's really interesting. I have an Amazon Alexa. I got it before Apple announced their new HomePod, and I'm not sure I now need HomePod. I'm not sure that the speaker sells itself enough for me to do anything different to what Alexa did. But I think if suddenly I had the ability to have voice recognition where, within my house, I can start sending stuff that I want to different places, and somebody else might be able to send other things to different places, that would be cool. And actually, that's the one big draw for me at the moment, of potentially switching to Google Home. It's the only thing which is maybe stopping me from doing it. And I think if we get to the end of this year and Apple haven't done something similar to that within HomePod, then I probably will see, rather than, if I was going to move away from Alexa to another device, I probably would go the Google route, which maybe is the start of my Android transition. Who knows? It won't be, but we'll see. I'm too much of an Apple fanboy. Okay, so Zan, in fact, no, we've had a similar question to that, so we won't do that one. And you mentioned Fuchsia before. And this is actually a question on Fuchsia. So what are your opinions of Fuchsia, and what effect will it have on app developers and app development?
My opinions on Fuchsia. So far, I have very little opinion on it. We'll see. I mean, we already mentioned that Google is world-renowned for killing their own products. So it's not even been released yet. They are investing heavily. So I think it's going to be released at some point. But no one knows in what form or shape. Is it going to replace a desktop operating system? Is it going to be a mobile? Is it going to be a Chromebook replacement, that mythical Chromebook Android hybrid that people have been so eagerly writing about? I honestly don't know, because as of today, it might not even happen.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting stuff. Okay, I'm going to come back to the end of the line with Dario, because this, I guess, could have a security take on it. Apple obviously have a very famous walled garden, in terms of what goes out into the App Store. Less so, obviously, with Android, although they still have their automated testing. So do walled gardens stifle creativity?
Sorry, what's that?
Do walled gardens stifle creativity? So I think we're talking about the fact that Apple review everything before it goes onto the App Store,
yeah.
And they potentially limit what is available.
I think when you want to create a platform at scale like the Play Store or the App Store, you have to create services that somehow put the red tape on the floor of what an app can do and what it cannot do. So if it would have an impact on creativity, I guess you would need to be even more creative to use those red tapes or red lines on the floor, or the boundaries that they give you to create something extra, something new. So I would say instead of limiting, I would say it should challenge you to go further, because they're necessary.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I think we're going to make this one the last question. It's actually quite a good question to finish on. So we'll go down the line again. We'll start at Dario and work to the other end. What are the most important and biggest challenges for... Hold on one. Let me read the question properly. What are the most important and exciting challenges and elements of developing in an era where more and more consumers are turning to mobile first and even mobile exclusive content access? So what are the challenges when consumers are going more mobile exclusive and certainly mobile first for accessing services. Dario.
Yeah, obviously, security and privacy is my thing, so I'll say my opinion on that. I think the biggest challenge will be like, we're already saying like we're collecting a lot of data, but the biggest challenge will be that if we're going to use this data in ways that give more information about the user, that we really handle it correctly, that there needs to be a shift in how we develop apps, putting the user central, as I said in my presentation. Because if mobile becomes the first go-to device, it means that we use it a lot. I mean, if people would know what I search on my phone, I mean, they would probably think I'm a criminal while I just have like good intentions of, okay, this is life, right? Yeah, I think that will be the biggest challenge, to create secure, private systems that are still connecting to the world around us, because that's the trend that we're seeing, that we're connecting more and more things to each other, things online. You're putting a smart TV in your house, you're putting Google Home or an Apple Pod, or yeah, so making it a secure system, I guess, will be the biggest challenge. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Xavier?
Well, I think one of the main challenges would be to get rid of all of our assumptions. If people go mobile first, we need to get rid of a lot of assumptions that we had when writing a website or writing a desktop application. If you look at 20 years ago, when you write a desktop application, you're pretty sure that, yeah, the user is going to be sitting at a desk in front of a computer with a keyboard and a mouse. And when you're talking about Android or iPhone or tablets, you can't make assumption that the user is going to have any kind of network or any kind of reliable network, because they could be moving. I am actually commuting a lot, and I often get angry at applications that can't handle well the fact that, yeah, right now I'm in a train that goes into a tunnel, and that, yeah, I'm going to lose my connection for 30 seconds, and then I'm going to get back a new connection. We can't make assumptions also on any information that we can get right now, that the information is going to stay the same for the next minute or the next hour. So it's the biggest challenge is making sure that our applications are going to be robust enough to handle seamlessly any change in the context of the user.
Cool, Zan?
Yeah, contextuality is like probably also key, and because you don't know the situation, and we need to be better and better at understanding where the user is, what they're doing. We probably already know who they are, but kind of what they're doing in the moment, and what are they. We need to be able to figure out their intentions for opening our app, especially if it's an app that does multiple things. And if we're considering options like voice and other types of inputting. So if I want to ask my phone, like, what session is next, I want it to know that we're talking about CodeMobile, that I'm in Chester, and just give me the bits of relevant information, because let's face it, the screens are small, the attention span of people is, oh, look, a cat. So yeah, essentially just figuring out the context better and accounting for that.
Cool.
Yes, I think the offline state one is a really good point, though, because I can't believe, like, in this day and age that we're still struggling about offline stuff, and we still have to say, but what happens when the user is offline? Oh, we'll just assume that they're online. That's a really wrong assumption, and I think following on from what they've said, I think it's we need to kind of throw all that out of the window. And then as well, also don't assume that your user is even on the device. I mean, there's plenty of other things that they can use, like you were mentioning before about like Amazon Alexa. I mean, I think we've got to assume that people aren't always going to be in your app looking at the phone in exactly the way that you expect. I mean, they might be, on the go. They might. I mean, I saw this great diagram of people, different people who use your app, and it's talking about, you know, disabled people and about designing for accessibility. But that's also talking about like temporal disabilities. So for example, if you've got a baby and you're holding a baby whilst using the app, you might be using the app, you might try and fling that to a TV, you might be in a car, you might be trying to use the app in the car, you might have a watch. I think there's so many things, there's so many ways that you can access different people's apps now that potentially we need to move away from the kind of app idea where we design one design for tablet and one design for phone. I mean, it's not a new concept in Android, but I think a lot of iOS developers kind of struggled at that point when it was like, oh, we haven't got 3 devices anymore. So I think we kind of need to remember that actually maybe your data is more key than your actual app itself, and maybe how you interact with the data and how you share that data across different platforms is also quite important.
Cool. And finally, James.
I'm probably a bit biased, but I think kind of scaling and you know, thinking about how you can ensure that if your app goes viral and gets super popular, how are you going to be able to cope with that, right? I always think of Pokemon Go, right? Pokemon Go just was kind of crazy when it came out in terms of usage, and I was reading some of the accounts that the back-end team wrote at the team about how they like struggled to keep up with the infrastructure was on fire all the time just because it was so popular. So I definitely think that is something with the ease and availability of apps, and that you can reach such a broad market if you hit some tipping point and suddenly get super popular. Like how are you going to be able to cope with that? And that kind of comes into the cloud and the ease at which you can provision and manage infrastructure. And then obviously for me it kind of comes back to serverless and this kind of natural way of using the cloud where it makes it very, very easy. Because things can get very, very popular super fast, and users don't want any downtime ever anymore, right? You can't be like, my app's down on Sunday from 5 till 9 while I do some updates. So it's just not acceptable. People expect, you to be up all the time and deploying to production multiple times a day. So people have very high expectations these days, and things can get popular, and it's going to be a challenge for us all to kind of manage that stuff.
Cool, sounds good. Let's thank our panel. Thank you very much.